You a family at home? Kids? These were the chilling questions 19-year-old Hollis Daniels asked the police officer who was quietly processing his arrest. He was sitting in a police briefing room, and his handcuffs had already been removed. But he was holding a terrible secret, a loaded firearm tucked into his sock. A weapon that police had somehow failed to find during 3 separate searches. A weapon he had already dropped in the back of the patrol car and then, impossibly, lied about. 4 seconds after he asked about the officer's family, he made his move. He believed he was smarter than all of them. He grabbed the officer's body cam, thinking he had just erased the only witness. But he never knew. A tiny hidden camera in the corner of the room was recording his every single move. This is the unbelievable story of a dark obsession, a string of impossible failures, and a teen killer who didn't realize his final, fatal act was being filmed. If you want to uncover the truth behind one of the most shocking and tragic cases of police negligence, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel right now. You do not want to miss this. Hollis Daniels, who insisted everyone call him Reed, felt the walls of his dormitory room pressing in. He was 19 years old, and already he felt ancient, worn down by a pressure that had no name but was always present. It was in the silence of the room, in the weight of the unopened textbook on his desk, and in the relentless, quiet hum of the building's ventilation. He was supposed to be studying. There was an exam in less than 48 hours, a paper that held a significant portion of his grade, and he could not force his eyes to focus on a single sentence. The words swam, meaningless black shapes on a white page. This was the isolation he knew best. It was a crowded campus. Thousands of students moved in loud, happy currents around him every day, but Reed felt invisible, a ghost haunting the pathways. He told himself it was the academic stress, the simple burden of a difficult course load at a major university. But he knew, in the quiet, trembling spaces of his mind, that it was something deeper. It was a gnawing anxiety, a constant static that he was desperate to silence. His hand moved, almost of its own accord, to the small, unlabeled bottle tucked into his backpack. He fumbled with the cap, his fingers clumsy. Just one. He dry swallowed the small pill, a familiar, bitter taste. He waited for the edges of the world to soften, for the frantic whispering in his head, his own personal demons, as he'd come to call them, to recede. He just needed to focus. He just needed a little quiet. A sharp buzz from his phone made him jump, the device vibrating violently against the wood of his desk. The sound was an intrusion, a violation of the fragile peace he was trying to build. He stared at the screen. The name on it made his heart clench. Elara. Even her name felt electric. She was the one person on campus who seemed to see him, a whirlwind of charisma and sharp, knowing glances. She was the absolute center of every room she entered, and for some reason, she had chosen to include him in her orbit. It was intoxicating, and it was terrifying. He picked up the phone. The message was short, devoid of the playful emojis she usually used. It was blunt, cold. Leo knows. You need to fix this. Now. Reed read the words one time. Then a second, and a third. The static in his head roared back to life, louder than before. The pill he had just taken was useless against this. Leo knows. Knows what? His mind raced, tripping over itself. Did he know about that night last week? The impossible, secret moment he and Elara had shared in the kitchen at that party, a connection so intense it had left him breathless. Or did he know about the other thing? The cold, heavy thing. The item. He had told himself it was not stealing. Stealing was a word for criminals. He was a student. He had borrowed it. He had seen it in Leo's room, tucked carelessly under a pile of clothes in an open drawer. Leo, his oldest friend, the one who was supposed to be his anchor here, had been flaunting it. A compact, dark firearm. Reed, in a fog of anxiety and a strange, bitter jealousy he couldn't name, had simply taken it. It was an impulse. He wanted to feel what Leo felt. He wanted that casual power. He wanted something, anything, to make him feel less small, less invisible. He had been carrying it for 3 days, a dense, terrible secret in the bottom of his backpack, and now tucked into the waistband of his jeans under his shirt. Leo knows. You need to fix this. The message was a command. But it was from Elara. Why was she the one telling him? Were they a we now? Was this a coordinated attack? He thought of Leo's face the last time he'd seen him, his expression tight with an anger Reed hadn't understood at the time. He had been asking about Elara, his questions casual but sharp. Reed had been evasive. He had seen the way Leo looked at her, the same desperate, possessive way half the men on campus did. And Reed had seen the way Elara looked at Leo with a dismissive, almost sisterly affection that seemed to fuel Leo's frustration. Now her message hammered into his paranoia. This was a betrayal. She and Leo were in this together. They were trapping him. Elara, with her intoxicating charm, had drawn him in just to expose him. Leo, his friend, was the hammer, and she was the one pointing him where to strike. Or, a different, more terrifying thought emerged. What if she was warning him? What if Leo was truly angry, not just about Elara, but about the missing valuable? What if fix this was not a threat, but a plea? He couldn't breathe. The room was too small, the air too thick. He stood up, knocking his chair over. It clattered to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud. He had to move. He had to find Leo. He had to give the item back, to apologize, to explain. But what could he possibly say? I took your firearm because I felt weak. I took it because you have everything and I have nothing. I took it because I'm terrified of you and Elara and myself. He paced the length of his room, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. The now in her text pulsed in his brain. Now, now, now. It was a ticking clock. He was out of time. He fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them. He scooped them up, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He had to see Leo. He had to fix this, whatever that meant. He didn't trust Elara. He didn't trust Leo. And most of all, he did not trust himself. As his hand closed around the doorknob, the phone buzzed again. He pulled it from his pocket with a trembling hand. A second message from Elara. He's at the house. Don't be stupid, Reed. Don't be stupid. The words felt like a slap. She thought he was stupid. Maybe he was. He pulled the door open and stepped out into the hallway, the familiar buzz of the lights overhead sounding like a warning siren. He was walking, moving, but he felt disconnected from his own body. He was a puppet, and Elara and Leo were pulling the strings. He automatically checked his waistline with his free hand. The cold, heavy object was still there, pressed against his skin. A terrible comfort, a terrible burden. He pushed through the main doors of the dormitory and stepped out into the tense, darkening evening, his mind a storm of fear, confusion, and a desperate, rising resolve. The sound of the door hitting the wall was the only announcement Reed needed. Leo's voice cut through the air before Reed was fully inside. "Where is it, Reed?" There was no greeting, no preamble, just the raw, frayed edge of an anger that had clearly been simmering for hours. Reed's own defensiveness rose like a shield. He pushed the door closed behind him, the click of the latch echoing the finality of the moment. "I don't know what you're talking about," Reed said, his voice a low monotone. He was trying for calm, for control, but his heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. "Don't play games with me," Leo snapped, his voice closer now. "You walked out of my room 3 days ago. It was there before you came in, and it was gone after you left. So I'll ask you one more time. Where is it?" "It was just a joke, Leo." "A stupid prank," Reed lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I was going to give it back. A joke." Leo's laugh was a sharp, ugly sound. "You think taking something like that is a joke? What were you going to do with it, Reed? Show it off. Try to feel like a big man for 5 minutes." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking right at the heart of Reed's insecurity. He flinched. "It's not like that. You don't understand. Then make me understand." Leo's voice rose, cracking with a frustration that went far beyond the missing object. "Because all I see is my supposed friend sneaking around, taking things that don't belong to him. All because you can't handle things." "Handle what?" Reed shot back, his own anger finally igniting. "Handle what, exactly?" "You." He took a step forward. "Or is this about her? Is this about Elara?" Leo fell silent for a beat. The air thickened. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "You leave her out of this." "I can't," Reed said, a wild, paranoid energy surging through him. Her text message was burning a hole in his mind. Leo knows. You need to fix this. She's the one who sent me here. This is your little plan, isn't it? Both of you. Corner me. Make me the bad guy. My plan? Leo sounded genuinely bewildered. Reed, she's terrified of you. The words stopped Reed cold. They made no sense. What? That's a lie. She's not scared of me. We have a connection. He said the word as if it were a sacred thing, a secret shield only he possessed. A connection. Leo's voice dripped with scorn. You cornered her at a party. You've been following her, sending her messages at all hours. She told me she feels like she can't breathe. She told me she was worried about what you might do. She thinks you're unstable. Reed's world tilted. Every interaction he'd had with Elara, every shared glance, every private smile he thought was meant only for him was now being twisted, reframed into something ugly, something predatory. Was he that blind? Or was this just another one of Leo's manipulations? She told you that? Reed whispered, the question barely audible. Yes, she told me that. And then she told me you took my firearm. Do you have any idea how that looks, Reed? Do you have any idea what that makes her think? What that makes me think? Leo took a step closer, his voice dropping to a plea. Just give it back. We can figure this out. You're not well. We can get you help. The word help was an insult. It was the ultimate dismissal of his feelings, of the very real pressure he was under. They thought he was broken. They thought he needed to be fixed. He and Elara, conspiring to have him put away. You don't care about helping me, Reed snarled. You just want what you think is yours. You want the item back, and you want her. You can't stand that she might have actually seen something in me that she doesn't see in you. That's not concern in your voice, Leo said, his own features hardening. That's possession. You talk about her like she's an object. Just like you took my property, you think you can just take her attention. Something inside Reed snapped. He lunged forward, shoving Leo hard in the chest. Don't you talk about me like you know me? Leo stumbled back, catching his balance. The shock on his face quickly morphed back into cold anger. Get out! Get out of my house! Gladly, Reed spat. He turned, his mind a maelstrom of betrayal and rage. He had come here to fix this, but there was nothing to fix. It was all broken. His friendship with Leo, his perceived bond with Elara, it was all a lie. He was alone. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. He wrenched the door open. He was not giving the firearm back. He was not giving them that satisfaction. It was his now. It was the only thing he had left that felt real, the only thing that gave him a sense of control in a world that was spinning away from him. A desperate, symbolic act of retaining the one piece of power he felt he had. Reed, don't you walk away. Leo shouted from behind him. Don't you dare. Reed didn't look back. He stalked out into the night, the weight in his waistband a constant, cold reminder of the choice he had just made. He was not the victim here. He would not let them make him one. Inside, Leo stood for a long moment, his breath heavy in the sudden silence of the room. He was shaking, not from the shove, but from a deep and profound fear. This was not the Reed he knew. This was someone else, someone unpredictable and unmoored. He looked at the empty doorway, then slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. He felt a pang of guilt, a deep sense of betraying a friend. But Elara's panicked words from earlier echoed in his ears. He has it, Leo. I'm scared. He pressed the screen and with a trembling finger dialed 3 numbers. He had to make the call. He had no other choice. He drove. There was no destination. The act of moving was the only thing that kept the panic from swallowing him whole. Leo's words were a repeating loop in his head. She's terrified of you. She thinks you're unstable. It was a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical injury. He had believed their connection was a silent, mutual understanding, a refuge. Instead, it was a delusion. He was just the strange, intense boy she was afraid of. And she had run to Leo, his friend, for protection. They had discussed him, judged him, condemned him. The rage from the confrontation had cooled, leaving behind a brittle, cold dread. He had the firearm. He had kept it. It was no longer a borrowed item or a prank. It was his. The thought sent a tremor through him, a mix of power and self-loathing. He had taken it from its place in his waistband while he was walking, his hands trembling, and hidden it under the driver's seat. It felt safer there. Less intimate. He was so lost in the vortex of his own thoughts that he did not register the lights until they were already filling his rearview mirror, a blinding, flashing pulse of red and blue. His blood turned to ice. It was impossible. How could they know? His foot moved to the brake automatically. He pulled the car to the side of the road, his mind a sudden, screaming blank. He knows. He called. Leo called them. The realization was absolute. This was it. It was over. A figure approached the driver's side window. Reed forced his hands to grip the steering wheel to stop them from shaking. A light shined in, then clicked off. A man's face appeared at the window. He was older, his expression not unkind. "What's going on, man?" Texas Tech Police Department. "Officer," Reed managed, his voice sounding strangely high. "Is there a problem?" "We got a call about a disturbance," the officer said, his voice calm and professional. "Over at a house on 28th Street. Were you just coming from there?" Yeah. Yes, sir," Reed stammered. "My friend's house." "Leo's house." "That's the one," the officer said, nodding slowly. "We got a call about you causing a disturbance. What's your friend's name?" "Leo," Reed repeated, his mind racing to build a story. We had an argument. A stupid argument. I just left. I was heading back to my dorm. Just an argument." The officer's eyes held his. "Because Leo called us. He sounded pretty worked up. He told us you were messing with them." "No, sir. It was just, you know how friends get. He said some things. I said some things. It got loud. I decided to leave before it got worse. That's all." The officer was silent for a moment, just watching him. He also mentioned an item. A missing item. Said you took something that belongs to him. This was the moment. The floor dropped out of Reed's stomach. He could feel the cold, heavy object just below his seat, separated from the officer's hand by a few inches of metal and fabric. He focused on his breathing. He had to be the person they wanted to see, a normal, slightly confused college kid. An item. Reed forced a small, baffled laugh. "Sir, I have no idea what you're talking about. He's angry. He's making things up because I walked out on the argument. I didn't take anything. I swear. I just want to go home." Another officer, younger, was visible now, standing near the back of the car. Officer Floyd East Jr., as his name tag read, seemed to consider this. He looked at Reed, then glanced back at his partner, then back to Reed. "You have any guns or any weapons in this vehicle, son? Any drugs or anything like that?" "What? No, sir, absolutely not." Reed tried to inject just the right amount of surprise into his voice. "You don't mind if we search your vehicle, then? Just to clear this whole thing up." The question hung in the air, a trap with steel teeth. Reed's mind, which had been frantic, suddenly became sharp, icily clear. Is that necessary, officer?" he asked, his voice soft. "I'm just on my way home. I haven't done anything wrong. I don't consent to a search. I just want to go." He held his breath. He had not been aggressive. He had not been rude. He had simply stated his position. Officer Floyd held his gaze for a long time. Reed could hear the quiet crackle of the officer's radio. He was at a crossroads. He had a frantic call from one student and a calm, polite denial from another. It was a gray area, he said, on a late night. Finally, Officer Floyd sighed and took a small step back from the car. The tension broke. "Look," the officer said, his voice losing its official edge, "your friend is very worked up. Whatever is going on between you two, you need to sort it out. Or, better yet, just stay away from each other for the night." "Yes, sir." "I will," Reed said, the relief so sudden and so total it made him feel lightheaded. "I'm just going straight back to my dorm. I'm done for the night." "You can carry on with your night, man," Officer Floyd said, gesturing him on. "Get home safe, buddy." He paused, then added, "Get some new friends." "Yes, sir. Thank you, officer." Reed put the car in drive, his hands moving with deliberate, measured slowness. He pulled away from the curb, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He did not look in the rearview mirror. He drove for 3 full blocks before his hands began to shake so violently that he had to grip the wheel with all his strength to keep the car straight. He had done it. He had lied to a police officer's face. He had been caught, and he had talked his way out. The firearm was still under his seat. He was safe. He was free. A strange, new feeling settled over him, pushing past the panic. It was a cold, quiet thrill. He had been tested, and he had not been found wanting. The world had presented him with a barrier, and he had simply stepped around it. The night did not bring sleep. It brought only a cold, vibrating awareness. Hollis, or Reed as he insisted on being, lay in his dorm room, the silence a high-pitched whine in his ears. The thrill of the traffic stopped the icy, perfect moment of control when he had looked Officer Floyd in the eye and lied had evaporated, leaving behind the sticky residue of his reality. He was safe from the law, but he was not safe from them. Leo's words echoed. "She's terrified of you." He turned onto his side, staring at the blank screen of his phone on the nightstand. He willed it to light up. He willed a message from Elara to appear, one that said, "Leo is a liar. I miss you. I'm not afraid." He imagined the words so clearly he almost thought he could see them. The phone remained dark. This silence was her collaborating. It was her agreement with Leo. They were a unit, and he was the outsider, the problem to be managed. The connection he had felt with her, that intense, unspoken understanding he believed they shared, was not a mutual refuge. It was his own private delusion. Or, a more sinister thought bloomed in the dark, it had been real, and Leo, in his jealousy, had systematically poisoned it. He had painted Reed as unstable, had twisted his quiet intensity into something threatening, all to frighten her into his own arms. This thought felt more correct. It made more sense. Elara was not afraid of him, she was being made to be afraid. Leo was the manipulator. He rose before dawn, his body aching as if he hadn't slept in a week. The day stretched before him, an empty, hostile expanse. His classes, his impending exam, they were abstract concepts, events happening to someone else in a different, simpler life. He was a ghost on campus, just as he had always felt, but now it was literal. He skipped his morning lecture and then his afternoon one. He moved along the pathways, his gaze lowered, convinced that every quiet conversation he passed was about him. He saw them, once. It was across the main lawn. He was sure it was them. Elara and Leo, walking together, their heads bent close. They were talking, and then Elara laughed at something Leo said. A bright, easy sound that felt like a physical blow. As he watched, frozen from a distance, Leo glanced up, and his eyes seemed to find Reed's instantly, even across the expanse. Leo's expression did not change, but he did not look away. Reed ducked behind a building, his heart hammering. It was a confirmation, a performance. They were flaunting their unity, their victory over him. He retreated to his room, the only place that felt marginally safe, but the walls were closing in again. The anxiety was a living thing, clawing up his throat. The small pills he had taken earlier were having no effect. The static was too loud. He remembered the other small bag he had, the one that sometimes blurred the edges. He smoked the marijuana, desperate for a reprieve, for a fog to roll in and obscure the sharp, painful clarity of his betrayal. But the fog did not bring peace. It only twisted his thoughts further, making the paranoia bloom. The lines between what was real and what he feared began to dissolve. He was trapped in his own head, and his own head was a hostile territory. He needed something solid, something real. His hand went to the backpack in his closet. He pulled out the firearm. It was heavier than he remembered. He sat on the edge of his bed, holding it, turning it over in his hands. This was not a lie. This was not a manipulation. It was a simple, true thing. It was an object of pure, unadulterated consequence. It was the one piece of control he had left. His obsession with Elara and his fixation on the firearm began to merge. They were two parts of the same problem. Leo was the barrier. Leo was the poison. The firearm was the answer. This logic felt sudden, clean, and terrifyingly correct. He felt a sense of power, a feeling that he could fix this. The pressure inside him was building to an unbearable level. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit here and wait for them to make the next move. He needed a release. He needed to know. He tucked the firearm back into his waistband, pulled a sweatshirt on over it, and left the dorm. He walked, his movements stiff and automatic, until he found a place he believed was private. A secluded spot away from the main campus pathways, where the sounds of construction and traffic provided a dull, Constant cover. He stood for a long moment, the object heavy in his hand. His pulse throbbed in his ears. This was not a test. It was not a game. It was a question, and he was about to get the answer. He raised his arm, his hand shaking, and he pulled the trigger. A loud report, sharp and violent, split the air. The sound was deafening, far louder than he could have ever imagined. The force of it kicked his hand back. In the sudden, ringing silence that followed, a new feeling washed over him. Pure, adrenaline-fueled panic. Had anyone heard, it was impossible that they hadn't. That sound was a scream. It was a confession. He shoved the firearm back into his waistband, the metal hot now, and he began to walk, then jog, then run, scrambling back toward the false safety of his dorm. His heart was hammering against his ribs, not with power, but with the sudden, crushing understanding that he had just started a clock that he could not stop. Somewhere, unseen, a student had just picked up their phone. The consequences were no longer theoretical, they were in motion. Officer Floyd East Jr. recognized the name as soon as it came over the radio. The dispatch was for a welfare check. A student had called in, reporting a single, loud report consistent with a firearm discharge near one of the dormitories. The system flagged the potential location, and the name associated with the nearest room was Hollis Daniels. Floyd felt that familiar, heavy sensation in his gut. It was the feeling of a puzzle piece clicking into place, one he wished had not. Hollis Daniels, the same young man he had pulled over not even 24 hours earlier, the same one who had been accused by his friend, Leo, of stealing a firearm. He had let him go. He had looked him in the eye and believed the lie. "I'll take that," he said into his radio, his voice calm and level. He and his partner proceeded toward the dorm, the sense of urgency higher than a standard welfare check. This was not just a wellness concern anymore, it was a potential confirmation of the very thing he had failed to find the night before. They arrived at the room. Floyd knocked, his hand striking the solid wood. "Texas Tech Police Department. We're here to conduct a welfare check." Silence from within. He knocked again, louder this time. "Hollis Daniels. This is the police. We need you to open the door." Only the dull hum of the hallway ventilation responded. Floyd shared a look with his partner. The gunshot report, combined with the previous night's incident and the total lack of response, gave them sufficient cause. "We're keying in," he announced, his voice projecting at the door. He used the master key. The lock clicked, and the door swung open into a quiet, dim space. Hollis Daniels was nowhere to be seen, but someone else was, stirring from sleep in one of the beds. A young man, startled into consciousness by the entry of two uniformed officers. "Hey, what's up, man?" Floyd's partner asked, his hand resting near his service weapon. The roommate, his name, they learned, was Andy, was confused and groggy. "I just woke up," he stammered, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" "We're looking for your roommate," Floyd said, his eyes already scanning the room, moving past the typical student clutter. "Hollis Daniels. Where is he?" Andy shook his head, pushing himself up on his elbows. "Hollis? I don't know. I don't know a whole lot about him, really. I haven't seen him much today. I don't really hang out with these guys." The answer confirmed Floyd's impression of Daniels, isolated, a ghost. While his partner continued to ask Andy routine questions about Hollis's state of mind, Floyd's attention was drawn to the area of the room that was clearly Hollis's. It was messy, but his eyes were trained to see past the surface. And then he saw it. Tucked partially under a chair, as if discarded, was an object that made his pulse quicken. "There's a gun right here," he said, his voice level, alerting his partner. He moved carefully and retrieved it. He examined it, his training taking over. It was a revolver. But as he turned it over, the initial surge of adrenaline receded, replaced by anticlimax. "It's CO2, he announced, mostly to himself. "Appellet eating. Not a firearm." It was not the weapon, but it was a weapon. It was a confirmation of a certain mindset. It was also, perhaps, the source of the gunshot report. A student could easily mistake the sound, but they were here, and a plain view search was warranted. He continued to look. His gaze settled on a small box on Hollis's desk. Something about it seemed out of place. He looked inside. Probably some drugs and paraphernalia in here, he said to his partner. He lifted an item. Looks like there's a little bag with some marijuana. It was a minor possession charge. But as his partner secured the pellet item, Floyd's eyes landed on something else. An antibiotic bottle. He picked it up. The label was not for Hollis. He popped the lid. It was not filled with antibiotics. It was filled with pills. A large quantity of them concealed. The situation had changed, instantly and dramatically. The gunshot report had led them to a carbon dioxide item. The search for the item had led them to marijuana. And the marijuana had led them to a significant quantity of concealed illicit pills. Officer Floyd looked at the bottle in his hand. The charge against Hollis Daniels was no longer theoretical. It was no longer just a friend's frantic accusation from the night before. He now had physical evidence. This was not a welfare check anymore. It was a narcotics investigation, and he was standing in the middle of the subject's dorm room, holding the evidence in his hand, just as, unknown to him, Hollis Daniels was walking back toward the building. The panic that had chased Hollis Daniels back from the secluded spot, the ringing echo of the firearm's discharge, was nothing compared to the cold, paralyzing dread that seized him when he opened his dorm room door. Officer Floyd East Jr. looked up. There were other officers in the room, 3 others. They were standing over his desk. His roommate, Andy, was pale and silent on his bed, and on his desk, in plain view, was the bottle of pills. The bag of marijuana, the carbon dioxide pellet item. It was over. "Hang on, what's your name, bud?" one of the officers asked, his voice firm. Hollis's mind, a kaleidoscope of fear, grasped for the first, most useless lie. "Andreas," he said. The officer did not even blink. "No, it's not. We've already talked to your other 3 roommates. We know what they look like," he gestured. "That was a good try, though. Hey, stand up for me real quick." Hollis stood, his body moving on an automatic pilot he was no longer in command of. The real firearm, the .45 caliber pistol, felt like a block of ice strapped to his waistband, searing his skin. "Do you have any weapons or anything on you?" the officer asked. "Interlace your fingers on top of your head." This was it. The air left his lungs. He raised his hands, his movements jerky and stiff, and laced his fingers on top of his head. He was staring at the wall, but he was not seeing it. He was only feeling. He was feeling the presence of the steel object hidden by a thin layer of cotton. He was feeling the officers move behind him. He was feeling the first, light touch of a hand on his shoulder. Then moving down his side. He prepared for the shout, for the sudden violence, for the end. A hand moved down his right side. He held his breath. The hand was professional, firm, moving in a practiced pattern. It was just millimeters away. He could feel the pressure of the hand brush against the hard, metallic edge of the object, separated only by the fabric of his shirt and jeans. He squeezed his eyes shut. Now, the hand continued moving. Down his leg. It had passed over it. It had touched it, and it had not registered. The officer's mind was not looking for a second weapon. It was looking for the obvious threats. The hand moved to his other side. "What's all in this pocket?" the officer asked. "Money," Hollis whispered, his voice cracking. "Is it okay to just empty out all your pockets while we're doing this?" Hollis's mind was still reeling from the miracle. The officer had missed it. He had physically touched it and had not known. He felt a sudden, dizzying surge of fatalism. He was untouchable. He found his voice, a faint spark of his old defiance returning. Do you? Is that necessary?" he asked, trying to sound tentative, nervous. "I'm asking you a question," the officer replied, his tone unchanged. No. I don't think so." The officer finished the pat down. They had not found it. They had missed the one thing that mattered. The mask of innocence, however tattered, was still in place. "So," Officer Floyd said, stepping forward. His voice was calm. He was the one from the traffic stop. He was the one Hollis had already fooled once. "What's going on with all the stuff in your room?" The question shifted the ground. The immediate, life-ending threat was past. Now it was about the drugs. This, he could manage. This was a problem he understood. "I smoke sometimes," Hollis admitted, gesturing vaguely at the marijuana, to say, "and I have a few people, sir." Those are yours, Floyd asked, indicating the pills. Yes, sir. So you don't have a prescription for that? That's a lot of. For one person. He was caught. There was no lie that would work for this. He was in possession. While he was struggling to form a coherent sentence, his eyes fell on the carbon dioxide item they had also placed on the desk. It was a lifeline. Oh, he said, injecting a rush of helpful, sudden honesty into his voice. I do have a pellet item, but it's not loaded. This was a truth. He could build on this. He could be the cooperative, harmless kid again. We saw that, too, Floyd said. What do you use the carbon dioxide item for? Honestly, Hollis said, trying to seem open. Back home, we used to just shoot squirrels and stuff. I thought it'd be kind of fun, but then I realized I got here, there's not many squirrels here, you know what I'm saying. He was babbling, but it was working. He was painting a picture of a harmless, slightly dumb college kid. He was not the person who had just fired a real weapon. He was not the person in possession of a large quantity of illicit substances for distribution. He was just a kid who missed shooting at squirrels. Then, Floyd's gaze sharpened. We also got a report of the gun. There was no gunshot in here. That's what we're told. Hollis's blood ran cold again. This was the second trap. He had escaped the pat-down, but here was the consequence of his action in the secluded spot. His mind worked faster than it ever had before. He could not deny the gunshot report, but he could reframe it. He could connect it to the other gun, the one he had lied about last night. Oh no, he said, shaking his head, performing his confusion. Yeah, I didn't. No, I wasn't even here last night. I was over at my buddy's, 28th Street. He was taking a massive gamble, linking two separate events, praying they would blur. What time did the shot go off? He pressed, his voice gaining a frantic, false confidence. Because if you look up the police reports from, Officer, what's his name? It was Duckworth. Officer Duckworth. We went through this whole thing. He didn't write me a ticket. He let me go. Because the whole situation was, they thought that I stole their gun. And so then they went and searched my car. You can look, and I see. You can look at his. What time he pulled me over. And I bet that whatever time the gunshot was reported won't actually. He was talking fast, weaving the traffic stop from the night before into a convoluted alibi for the gunshot report from an hour ago. He was creating a fog of bureaucratic detail, of police reports and different officers and accusations. One of the officers was on his radio. Hollis waited, his entire body trembling, though he tried to make it look like he was just cold. The officer looked up from the radio. The traffic stop checks out. The report from last night backs this story up. Hollis could have collapsed. It had worked. They had connected the gunshot report they received to the stolen gun report Leo had made. They believed his timeline. They believed the lie. The officers were now looking at him differently. He was not an active threat. He was just a kid who had lied about his name, who was caught with some personal use substances, and who was mixed up in some drama with his friends. They had missed the firearm. They had bought his alibi. He was, impossibly, still in the game. The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by a mundane, procedural quiet. The officers were no longer investigating a potential active threat. They were simply processing a narcotics violation. The gunshot report, in their minds, was a clerical error, a ghost from the previous night, now neatly filed away by Hollis's convoluted but verifiable story about the traffic stop. Officer Floyd East Jr., the man Hollis had lied to, was the one who spoke. His voice was calm, almost tired. "All right, Hollis," he said, and the use of his real name felt like the first true lock clicking into place. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're being placed under arrest for possession of a controlled substance." It was happening. But the terror that should have accompanied those words was absent, replaced by a strange, cold detachment. Hollis turned, his body compliant, his mind operating on a separate, protected level. He was a spectator watching himself get arrested. He felt the officers move in behind him. He was about to be searched again, this time not a cursory pat-down for immediate threats, but a search incident to arrest. This would be thorough. This would be the end. The miracle of the first search had been a fluke, a lucky break. There would not be a second. We're going to search you again, more thoroughly this time, before we transport you, one of the officers stated, his voice a neutral fact. Hollis braced himself. He felt the officer's hands again, this time with a different, more meticulous pressure. The officer started at his shoulders, worked his way down his arms, then moved to his torso. Hollis's breath hitched. The firearm was right there, a solid, undeniable shape against his ribs, hidden by his sweatshirt and shirt. The officer's hands pressed firmly against his sides, his chest, his back. Hollis was certain the outline was as obvious as a mountain. He was certain the cold, hard steel would be impossible to mistake for a wallet or a phone, and yet the hands moved on. They did not stop. They did not pause. They continued down, checking the waistband of his jeans, the very place the object was tucked with a firm, practiced motion that somehow slid right over the grip and the trigger guard as if it were just a fold in the fabric, or perhaps the buckle of a belt they did not care about. The hands moved over his pockets, which he was asked to empty. They moved down his legs. The officer's fingers dug slightly, checking seams, ankles, socks, and nothing. The hands moved away. Hollis stood there, his mind a silent, ringing void. It was not possible. He had been searched thoroughly by a trained police officer, and the .45 caliber pistol in his waistband had been missed. Again, he had not been lucky. This was not luck. Luck was a random, stupid idea for people who played games. This was something else. It was a path. A strange, unseen force was actively clearing the way for him. He had lied to an officer and been believed. He had been searched, and the truth of his possession had been ignored. He had fired a weapon, and the report had been misattributed and dismissed. And now he had been searched again, meticulously, and the object itself had been rendered invisible. A cold click of metal sounded behind him. The handcuffs snapped shut, securing his wrists. The cold, metallic bite was definitive. He was, officially, a prisoner. But he had never felt more powerful. This arrest was not a punishment. It was a misdirection. The universe, or whatever dark intelligence was guiding these events, was not interested in his minor transgression with the pills. It was preserving him and the firearm for something else. This was the point of no return. He was no longer just a scared, paranoid kid lashing out. He felt as if he had been chosen. He was being protected. The normal rules of consequence, of cause and effect, had been suspended for him. "Let's go," an officer said. He was escorted from the room. He walked through the hallway, his head held high. He was aware of other students peering from their doorways, their faces a mix of curiosity and fear. He was a spectacle, the bad kid being hauled away. They thought they were seeing a moment of defeat. They had no idea. They were seeing a man who had just been given a sign. He was led out of the building and to Officer Floyd's patrol car, the same officer who had let him go the night before, the same officer who had just arrested him, the same officer who was now, unknowingly, sitting him in the back of his car, fully, completely, and dangerously armed. As the door shut, sealing him inside, Hollis looked at the back of Officer Floyd's head. The man was just doing his job, processing another college kid for a minor drug offense. He was a cog in a machine that Hollis had just, impossibly, transcended. The feeling was not guilt, or fear, or even relief. It was a cold, terrifying, and absolute sense of purpose. He did not know what was going to happen next, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled his bones, that he was being guided toward it. The patrol car was a small, sealed world. Hollis sat in the back, his hands cuffed in front of him, a concession to a compliant arrest. The sense of detachment, of being a passenger in his own life, was overwhelming. He watched the back of Officer Floyd's head. This man was the embodiment of the system he had just, impossibly, fooled. Not once, but 3 times over. The traffic stop, the missed pat-down, the flawed alibi, the failed second search. It was not luck. It was destiny. He was being protected. He shifted in the hard, molded plastic seat, trying to find a more comfortable position for the ride. The handcuffs were awkward, resting in his lap. He adjusted his weight, moving to settle in, and the world stopped. In that tiny movement, the firearm, which had been resting precariously in his waistband, was dislodged. It was a terrible, slow-motion cascade. He felt it tip, slide free, and then fall. It did not make a small sound. It made a loud, obscene, and completely unmistakable noise. A heavy, dense thump as the .45 caliber pistol struck the floor mat at his feet. Officer Floyd's head snapped up, his eyes finding Hollis in the rearview mirror. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice sharp, instantly alert. What was that big thump? The blood drained from Hollis's face. The fatalism, the sense of being guided, all of it evaporated in a white-hot flash of pure animal terror. This was it. There was no lie for this. There was no explaining a heavy, metallic object falling to the floor. The game was over. It was a stupid, clumsy, ridiculous end. His mind, screaming, grasped for the only other metal object in play. "Oh," Hollis stammered, his voice sounding thin and distant. My handcuffs." He lifted his cuffed hands an inch, rattling them for effect. "They slipped off my lap. They just hit the floor. Sorry." The lie was pathetic. It was transparent. The sound of light handcuffs hitting a mat could never be mistaken for the sound they had both just heard. Hollis held his breath, waiting for the car to pull over, for the door to be wrenched open, for the shouting to begin. Officer Floyd held his gaze in the mirror for a long, agonizing second. He was suspicious. Hollis could see the calculations turning in the officer's mind, but they were on a busy road. He was driving. He had a prisoner in the back who was, ostensibly, secured. The simplest explanation, however flawed, was the one he accepted. "All right," Floyd said, his voice still tight with suspicion, but his eyes turning back to the road. "Just sit still back there. Don't move around." Hollis did not breathe. He remained perfectly, rigidly still. The firearm was on the floor, between his feet. It was lying in the dark, a truth that could be seen by anyone who cared to look. His heart was a thunderstorm, a painful, frantic beating against his ribs. He had been given a reprieve, but it was measured in seconds. The drive would not last forever. When they arrived at the station, they would pull him out. They would see it. He had to get it. He had to retrieve it. He waited. He watched the back of Officer Floyd's head, watching the slight movements that indicated he was checking traffic, focused on the road ahead. Now, in one, agonizingly slow and clumsy movement, Hollis bent forward. The handcuffs made it difficult, forcing his arms to move as a single unit. His back screamed in protest. He fumbled in the dark, his cuffed fingers brushing against the floor mat. He was making too much noise. The sound of his clothes, the slight rattle of the cuffs, seemed to fill the car. His fingers brushed cold steel. He fumbled again, trying to get a grip. His cuffed hands were almost useless, but he managed to get a hold on the barrel. He lifted it. It felt impossibly heavy. He sat back up, his breath coming in short, painful gasps. He had it. He had it in his lap. He could not put it back in his waistband. It was too precarious. It had already failed. He needed somewhere secure, somewhere it could not be found. He glanced at Officer Floyd. The man was still driving, oblivious. Hollis moved again, this time with more precision. He lifted his pant leg slightly, and with his cuffed hands, he worked the firearm down, past his ankle, and secured it deep inside his sock. The fabric of his jeans fell over it, concealing it completely. It was uncomfortable, but it was secure. He leaned back against the seat, his entire body trembling with the aftershock of the adrenaline. He was drenched in sweat. He had done it. He had dropped a loaded firearm at the feet of a police officer, lied about it, and then successfully retrieved and hidden it, all while in handcuffs in the back of a patrol car. This was not luck. This was not a path. This was a sign. He was not just being guided, he was being chosen. The rules did not apply to him. He was invincible. A cold, terrifying calm settled over him, displacing the panic entirely. He was, truly, untouchable.